The house was dead silent. I sat in the kitchen, stirring my cup of coffee, staring out at the empty driveway, wondering where the hell she really was. The minutes dragged into hours. Midnight came and went, and I couldn't shake the knot tightening in my stomach. I was never the jealous type, but something wasn't right. I could feel it. I decided to check my phone for messages, just out of curiosity. There was one text from Sarah earlier in the evening. Asterisk, don't wait up for me, babe. It might be a late night. Asterisk, innocent enough, but there was a chill behind her words that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe it was just that quiet intuition gnawing at my gut. It wasn't until around 2 a.m. that Sarah finally strolled through the door, her perfume lingering too strongly in the air. She looked flushed, her smile a little too wide, her hair slightly disheveled. My heart sank. She muttered something about losing track of time and traffic, but I wasn't hearing her. I was already lost in a storm of doubt. "Where've you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She flashed a quick smile, like I just asked her the time. "I told you, with friends," she shrugged, kicking off her heels with a careless laugh. "Relax, Mike. You're being paranoid." That word, paranoid. It stuck in my chest like a thorn. I wanted to believe her. God knows I wanted to. But there was something off, something in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. The unease grew heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Something big. Still, I didn't push her. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find if I did. I watched her disappear into the bedroom, casually undressing and throwing her clothes onto the floor, like she didn't have a care in the world, like she didn't have anything to hide. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to her, staring up at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. Her frequent nights out, the sudden changes in her behavior, the coldness that seemed to settle between us like an invisible wall. She was slipping away, and I was losing her. But I wasn't about to let her go that easily. I woke up the next morning with a bitter resolve. If something was going on, I was going to find out. No more turning a blind eye. No more excuses. This was my marriage on the line, and I wasn't going to sit back while it crumbled around me. Sarah had always been good at lying, at covering her tracks. But I had a feeling this time she wouldn't be so careful. And I was right. A few days later, while Sarah was out again, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her phone. She'd always been glued to that thing, typing away at all hours, but I'd never thought much of it, until now. It took me a minute to find her passcode, but once I was in, everything fell apart. The texts were there, dozens of them, from a number I didn't recognize. Last night was amazing. One message read, asterisk, "I can't wait to see you again." Asterisk. My stomach churned. I scrolled further, my hands shaking. The words blurred together, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a completely separate life behind my back, with someone else. I put the phone down, my heart pounding in my ears. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Every moment we'd shared, every kiss, every laugh, it was all a lie. And the worst part? I hadn't even seen it coming. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, feeling my world collapse. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? And then the anger hit. The anger that surged through me was like a fire that I couldn't put out. My hands clenched into fists, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The messages from that unknown number were burned into my brain, like a stain I couldn't scrub out. Last night was amazing. Those words echoed in my head, gnawing at whatever was left of my dignity. How could she? I had given Sarah everything. Every ounce of my time, my love, my loyalty. I wasn't a fool. I knew there were differences between us. I was 65 and she was 34. I had money, experience, stability, things I thought she appreciated, things I thought we were building on. And she had brought excitement back into my life, made me feel young again, made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I still had something to offer. But now it was like a cruel joke. She had been using me the entire time. I could see it now, every small moment I had once dismissed as paranoia. The long hours out, the vague explanations, the distant looks when I spoke to her. She didn't care about me. She cared about what I could give her. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was staring me in the face, screaming at me to wake up. My chest tightened as I stood up from the couch, pacing the living room in a daze. The room felt colder now, darker, like the very air had turned against me. How long had this been going on? Months? A year? My mind ran in circles, trying to make sense of it all. The texts didn't lie, though. They were filled with details. Places they'd been, nights they'd spent together, things they did that I couldn't even bring myself to think about. It was all there in black and white. She had betrayed me, and there was no way to undo it. But even worse than the betrayal was the realization that I had been played for a fool. She had been so good at hiding it, at pretending that everything was fine between us. I had fallen for her lies, hook, line, and sinker, and now here I was, standing in the wreckage of my life, knowing that my wife had been cheating on me, probably laughing behind my back the entire time. I had to confront her. There was no way around it. But how? What was I going to say? How do you even begin to address something like this? My heart raced at the thought of seeing her face when I laid it all out. Would she deny it? Would she lie to me again? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Later that evening, Sarah came home, just like she always did, casual, like nothing was wrong. She walked through the door with that same carefree smile, humming to herself as if the world was still turning just fine. I was in the living room, gripping the edge of my chair, trying to keep myself together. "Hey, babe," she called out, dropping her purse by the door. "What's for dinner?" "Dinner. Dinner?" She was asking me about dinner while I was sitting there, drowning in the knowledge of her betrayal. The rage bubbled up inside me again, and I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from exploding right then and there. Instead, I stood up, staring at her. I could barely breathe. "We need to talk," I said, my voice strained. She glanced at me, her brow furrowing just a little. "About what?" she asked, her tone casual, almost dismissive. I couldn't take it anymore. The floodgates opened. "About this?" I snapped, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. "About all the lies. About who the hell you've been sneaking around with." For a moment, she froze. Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. There was a flicker of something, fear maybe, but it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice cool. "Too cool. Don't play games with me, Sarah," I growled, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I know. I've seen the messages. I've seen everything." She stared at me for a long second, then let out a small, bitter laugh. "Oh, that?" she said, rolling her eyes. "You're seriously upset about that? Come on, Mike. It's not what you think." My blood boiled. Not what I thought. The nerve of her. She was standing there, acting like I was overreacting, like I was the one blowing things out of proportion. My fists clenched by my sides, and I took a step closer. "Not what I think?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months. I saw the messages, Sarah. Do you think I'm an idiot?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "I told you it's nothing serious, just a bit of fun. You're making this into something it's not. A bit of fun?" My heart shattered into a million pieces at her words. This was what I had meant to her. A convenience. A wallet. Someone to take care of her while she lived out her double life, sneaking around with God knows who behind my back. The fury inside me turned to something colder, something darker. "I gave you everything," I whispered, my voice trembling. "And this is how you repay me? With lies? With fun?" Sarah sighed, like she was tired of the whole conversation. "Mike, you're overreacting. You knew what this was from the start. I'm young, I have needs. Did you really think I'd be satisfied with just this?" Her words cut deep, slicing through whatever was left of my dignity. And that was when I realized I had never truly known her at all. Her words hung in the air, twisting inside my chest like a knife. Did you really think I'd be satisfied with just this? The arrogance, the coldness of her tone. It all hit me at once. I stood there, frozen in place, trying to absorb the reality of the person standing in front of me. This wasn't the Sarah I had married. This wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. Just this. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, struggling to keep myself from losing control. You mean our marriage? Our life together? Is that what you're reducing it to? She didn't flinch. Her eyes, once so warm and inviting, were now like ice. She took a deep breath, rolling her eyes, clearly annoyed. Look, Mike, she said, as if she were talking to a child. You're acting like this is some huge betrayal. It's not. You're older. You've got your life pretty much figured out. And me? I still need excitement. I still need passion. Her words stabbed through me, one by one, each more painful than the last. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake or a one-time slip-up. This was deliberate, calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she didn't care. Excitement, I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. Is that what this is about? You're out there with God knows who because you're bored? Because I'm not enough for you? Sarah shrugged again, so nonchalant, so detached, like this entire conversation was beneath her. I didn't think you'd get so worked up over it, she said, her lips curling into a smirk that made me want to scream. You're still my husband, Mike, but I have needs, and sometimes those needs can't be met by one person. You of all people should understand that. My blood ran cold. She was actually standing there, justifying her betrayal as if it were perfectly normal, as if it were my fault for not being enough for her. The audacity was overwhelming. It was like the person I had loved for years had been replaced by a heartless stranger. Someone who didn't care how many lives she destroyed as long as she got what she wanted. You're unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head. How long, Sarah? How long has this been going on? She sighed dramatically, like I was tiring her out with my questions. Does it really matter? She replied, her tone dripping with impatience. It's been a while. Let's just leave it at that. A while. The casual way she said it, as if cheating on her husband for a while was no big deal, sent a wave of nausea through me. I felt my fists tighten, my knuckles white with the effort it took not to lash out. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to throw something, to break down in a fit of rage. But I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, staring at her, feeling the last remnants of our marriage crumble into dust. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to know what had changed, when I had lost her, when she had started seeing me as nothing more than an ATM, a stepping stone to a more exciting life. But deep down, I knew those questions wouldn't matter. The truth was simple. I had been a fool. I had been so blinded by my love for her, by my desire to believe that what we had was real, that I hadn't seen the signs. Or worse, I had ignored them. I gave you everything, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I gave you my time, my love, my money. I thought you loved me, Sarah. She looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and condescension, like I was some sad, pathetic old man who just didn't get it. I do love you, Mike, she said, and for a second, I almost believed her. Almost. But love isn't enough sometimes. People change. Desires change. You can't expect me to sit around here, day after day, waiting for you to come to terms with that. The anger surged again, hotter this time. Couldn't hold it back anymore. You don't love me? I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. You love the lifestyle I gave you. You love the money, the trips, the nice things. But me? You stopped loving me a long time ago, didn't you? Her silence was all the answer I needed. The room felt like it was closing in around me, the walls too tight, the air too thick. I could barely breathe. I had spent years convincing myself that we were happy, that the age gap didn't matter, that I could keep her satisfied with everything I had to offer. But it was all a lie. She had been lying to me from the start, and I had been too blind to see it. I'm done, I said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm. I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I can't keep pretending that we're okay, that you're still the woman I fell in love with. She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. So what are you going to do? She asked, as if daring me to act, to make a decision. I didn't know. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to throw her out right then and there, to slam the door in her face and never look back. But another part of me, God help me, still loved her, still wanted to fix this, to find some way to make her see what she was doing to us. But I knew, deep down, that there was nothing left to fix. I don't know yet, I admitted, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me like a heavy blanket. But this thing you're doing, it ends now. If you want to stay in this marriage, you end it. You stop seeing him. You stop lying to me. Sarah tilted her head slightly, as if considering my words, but I could see the defiance in her eyes, the refusal to be controlled, even now. I'll think about it, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. And that was when I realized she had already made her choice. Her words hung in the air like a final blow, colder than anything she'd said before. I'll think about it. That mocking tone, the arrogance, the absolute lack of remorse. It all hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't going to stop. She didn't care. I had been living in this fantasy where we could work it out, where she might come to her senses and choose me, choose us. But in reality, Sarah had already moved on. I stood there, feeling completely powerless. I was staring into the face of the woman I had loved with all my heart, the woman I had married, and I didn't recognize her at all. The pain of that realization was unbearable. She had no intention of ending her affair, no intention of fighting for our marriage. She was too wrapped up in her own selfish desires to see the damage she was causing. For the first time in a long while, I felt small, defeated. There was no fight left in me. I had spent so much time and energy trying to ignore the signs, trying to hold onto the hope that things could go back to the way they were. But those days were gone. The Sarah I knew or thought I knew had disappeared a long time ago, replaced by someone colder, more calculating, more ruthless. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. Think about it? That's all you've got to say. She didn't even look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the phone she had just picked up, her fingers scrolling through some app like nothing had happened. It was as if this entire conversation, the complete destruction of our marriage, didn't matter to her. I told you, she replied casually. It's not that big of a deal. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Mike. Blowing it out of proportion? My whole world had just crumbled, and she was treating it like a minor inconvenience. I felt the anger boiling up inside me again, hotter this time, threatening to spill over. I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself from saying something I couldn't take back. But the longer I stood there, watching her continue with her life like nothing was wrong, the more I realized there was nothing left to hold on to. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a prison, a lie built on the illusion of love and trust. I had convinced myself for years that what we had was real, but now it was clear. I had been nothing more than a tool for her, a way to get the life she wanted, the money she craved. And once she had everything she needed, she moved on without a second thought. I'm done, Sarah, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like the words were being torn from me, like I was ripping out the last piece of myself that had held on to any hope. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending. For a moment, she paused, glancing up at me with a look of mild curiosity, as if she hadn't expected me to say that. But there was no panic in her eyes, no fear of losing me. She shrugged, as if to say, suit yourself. Fine, she said, her tone flat and indifferent. If that's what you want. I stared at her, trying to understand how it had come to this. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my money, my future. I had built a life for us, thinking we were in it together, thinking we were a team. But she didn't care. Not about me, not about our marriage, not about anything but herself. I want a divorce, I said, the words tumbling out before I even had time to process them. Once they were spoken, though, I knew there was no turning back. This was it, the end. Sarah didn't even flinch. She just looked at me with that same cold, detached expression, like she had been expecting this all along. Maybe she had. Maybe this was what she had been waiting for, an easy way out. "Okay," she said simply, standing up from the couch and walking toward the bedroom, her phone still in hand. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." And that was it. No fight, no argument, no tears. Just indifference. Like I was some business deal she was wrapping up, some loose end she had finally tied off. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there in the middle of the living room, alone with the weight of what had just happened. It took a few minutes for the reality to fully sink in. I had just ended my marriage. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life around, was walking away without a second thought, and I didn't even know who she really was anymore. I had been used, played, manipulated into thinking I was enough for her when, in truth, I had never stood a chance. As I stood there, staring blankly at the space she had just vacated, the anger inside me finally gave way to something else, something darker. A deep, hollow emptiness settled in my chest, suffocating me. It was over. All of it. The love I had clung to, the trust one had believed in, the future I had hoped for. It was all gone, ripped away in the blink of an eye. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. My mind raced with thoughts of everything that had led up to this moment. Every sign I had ignored, every lie she had told. I had been so blind, so utterly foolish to think that a woman like Sarah could ever be satisfied with someone like me. And yet, deep down, there was still a part of me that wanted to hold on. A part of me that couldn't let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would wake up and realize what she had done. That she would see the damage, feel the regret, and come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. But as the hours passed, and the house remained silent except for the soft clicking of her phone in the other room, I knew the truth. She was never coming back. The silence in the house was deafening. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, listening to the faint, almost maddening sound of Sarah typing away on her phone in the other room. It was like a metronome of my failure, each tap of her fingers reminding me of the life I had lost, the trust one had been foolish enough to give her. I was still trying to wrap my head around what had happened. It wasn't just the fact that she had cheated. That was bad enough, but it was the way she had brushed it off. The way she had looked at me with that cold, detached expression, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience she had to deal with. I'd seen more emotion from her when she ordered takeout. Part of me wanted to burst into that room, grab the phone out of her hands, and demand answers. Who was he? How long had this been going on? How could she have done this to me, to us? But I didn't. What would have been the point? She had already made it clear how little I mattered to her. Any explanation she gave would only twist the knife deeper. Instead, I sat there, numb. My thoughts were a jumble of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, but none. You said, "Baczni 5 частину Shanova dujet skava." ChatGPT said, ChatGPT. Part 5, the morning after. The morning sunlight poured through the window, but it felt cold, like it had lost its warmth. I woke up in an empty bed. I didn't remember falling asleep, just staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged me under. Now I was alone, and the silence in the house was louder than it had ever been. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Maybe I'd wake up, find Sarah next to me, and everything would be as it was. But as soon as I heard the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, reality came crashing back. She's still here. The woman who had torn my heart to shreds, who had casually admitted to betraying me, was making herself breakfast like nothing had happened. I threw the blanket off and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. Every part of me wanted to stay in that room, to hide from the confrontation that was surely coming. But I couldn't. I wasn't the kind of man who ran away from his problems. No matter how much it hurt, I needed to face it. I needed to face her. Dragging myself to my feet, I walked out of the bedroom and into the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The sound of Sarah's humming floated down the hall, a cheerful little tune, like the events of the previous night had already faded from her mind. I rounded the corner and found her standing at the kitchen counter, casually flipping through her phone as she waited for her coffee to brew. She didn't even look up when I entered the room. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. The casual way she moved, the lack of guilt or remorse in her demeanor. It was infuriating. She hadn't even bothered to address the massive elephant in the room, like she expected me to just accept everything, move on, and pretend none of it mattered. "You slept well, I see," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I hadn't meant to start off like that, but the anger was already bubbling under the surface. Sarah finally glanced up, raising an eyebrow as if she didn't understand the tension in the air. "Good morning to you too," she said, her tone light, almost condescending. She went back to scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee with one hand. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "We need to talk," I said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. She let out a long, exaggerated sigh, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Mike, we talked last night. You know where I stand on this. I don't see why we need to go over it again." The arrogance, the absolute gall of her to act like this was no big deal. My fists clenched at my sides, but I kept my voice steady. "You think you can just brush this off? Like none of it matters? Like our marriage doesn't matter?" Sarah finally put her phone down, leaning against the counter with that same disinterested look she'd worn all night. "It's not that it doesn't matter," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "But you're blowing this out of proportion. I told you it's just fun. It's not serious. Just fun." There it was again, those same words that had cut through me like a knife the night before. I couldn't believe she was still standing by that excuse, still trying to downplay the complete destruction of our relationship. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "How long have you been having fun?" She shrugged, as if the question didn't really interest her. "A few months. Maybe more. Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," I shouted, unable to hold back anymore. "It matters because I deserve the truth, Sarah. I deserve to know how long you've been lying to me, how long you've been sneaking around behind my back." She rolled her eyes, taking another sip of coffee. "Mike, this doesn't change anything between us. You're still my husband. But like I said, I have needs that you—" "Don't you dare," I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. "Don't you dare try to make this about me not being enough for you. I gave you everything, Sarah. My time, my love, my trust. I built a life for us, and you—" "Exactly," she cut in, her tone suddenly sharper, colder. "You gave me a life that I'm supposed to be grateful for, right? You think just because you're older and successful that I should be satisfied with whatever crumbs of attention you throw my way? That I should be content with your routine?" Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this how she had seen me all along? As some boring, predictable old man who couldn't keep up with her needs? The hurt twisted inside me, but now there was something else too. Rage. "Routine," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "I gave you stability. I gave you security. I gave you a future. And this is how you repay me? By running off with some other guy because you're bored?" She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed almost amused by my outburst. "You're acting like I'm the villain here, Mike. But let's be real, you knew what this was from the beginning. You're older, I'm younger. You can't seriously have thought I'd be satisfied forever." It was like she was twisting the knife, each word carefully designed to hurt me in the worst possible way. And it was working. I could feel the foundation of everything I had believed in, our marriage, our love, crumbling beneath my feet. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You're just going to walk away from everything we built? Throw it all away for what? Some fling? Some guy who's what, 25, maybe 30? She shrugged again, as if the question was beneath her. "Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Depends on how things play out, I guess." Her indifference broke something inside me. This woman, this stranger standing in front of me, was not the Sarah I had married. She was a user, a manipulator, someone who had never really loved me at all. "Get out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "What?" "Get out," I repeated louder this time, Pack your things and get the hell out of my house. I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. But you're not staying here. Not after this." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe I had finally said it. But then she shrugged, that infuriating, dismissive gesture that made my blood boil. "Fine," she said, pushing off from the counter and walking toward the bedroom. "I'll be out by tonight." I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle over me like a suffocating blanket. It was over, just like that. She had never fought for us, never tried to save what we had. And now, I was left standing in the wreckage of my marriage, wondering how the hell I had let it get this far. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let her destroy me anymore. The sound of the front door clicking shut echoed through the house like a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. She was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty hallway, half expecting her to come back, to walk in and say it was all a joke, some cruel test of my patience. But she didn't. Sarah didn't fight. She didn't even hesitate. Just like that, she packed her bags and left, like walking out of a cafe after a bad meal. No emotion, no remorse. It was all so transactional. I sank into the living room chair, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. The silence was unbearable. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt cold, hollow, as though Sarah had taken more than her clothes when she left. She'd taken the very air, the energy that made this place a home. I looked around the room, the pictures on the wall of our wedding day, the framed vacation photos, moments that had meant the world to me. But now they felt like lies, reminders of the fool I'd been. How had I not seen it? How could I have been so blind? I ran my hands through my hair, trying to push the thoughts away, but they kept flooding in. I had spent years convincing myself that Sarah's behavior was just part of her youthful spirit, that her need for excitement was something I could manage, something that didn't threaten what we had. But I was wrong, dead wrong. I had given her everything, and in return, she had treated me like a stepping stone. A temporary pit stop until something better came along. The rage boiled up again, but this time, it was tempered by something deeper, a sense of betrayal so profound that it left me hollow. I couldn't help but replay the last words she had said to me. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. The indifference in her voice, the lack of any real attachment, made it clear. She never cared about me. Not really. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I couldn't sit here any longer, drowning in the aftermath of my shattered life. I needed air. I needed to get out of this house before it swallowed me whole. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door, slamming it behind me. The cool autumn air hit my face as I made my way down the driveway. I didn't know where I was going, but I just kept walking. My legs moved on autopilot, taking me through the quiet streets of the neighborhood I had lived in for years. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. As I wandered, memories of Sarah and me kept flashing in my mind. The early days when we couldn't keep our hands off each other. When the age gap didn't matter, when I had thought we were truly in love. I had believed her every word, every promise she had made about our future. But now, those promises felt like cheap lies, carefully crafted to get what she wanted. I found myself at the edge of the park, a place where Sarah and I used to take walks, laughing and talking like we had all the time in the world. It was so strange how those moments had felt real to me, but now, in hindsight, I could see the cracks. Her impatience when I wanted to stay a little longer, the way she checked her phone constantly, even when we were supposed to be spending quality time together. I walked over to a bench and sat down, my head spinning with questions I couldn't answer. How long had she been planning this? Was this her goal all along? To use me, milk what she could out of me, and then move on to something better? I had always prided myself on being sharp, on seeing through people's intentions. But with Sarah, I had been blind, completely blinded by my own need to believe she loved me. The wind rustled through the trees, and I stared at the playground where kids were running around, their laughter filling the air. For a moment, I let myself imagine what my life could have been like if things had gone differently. If Sarah had really loved me, if we had started a family, built a life that was more than just the facade of happiness. But those thoughts only lasted a second. I knew better now. I knew who Sarah really was. I stayed on that bench for what felt like hours, my mind replaying the events of the last few days over and over, dissecting every word, every look, every hint of the betrayal that had slowly poisoned our marriage. I had always thought I was the strong one, the one who could weather any storm. But now I felt weak, beaten down. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Reluctantly, I pulled it out, half expecting it to be Sarah. Maybe she had something more to say. Maybe she wanted to gloat or twist the knife further. But it wasn't her. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Then, curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the message. "Mike, it's Tom. I didn't want to say anything, but you deserve to know. I saw Sarah at the bar last night. She wasn't alone. I think it's time you heard the full story. Call me when you can." I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. Tom? My business partner, my closest friend? He'd known something about Sarah? He'd seen her with someone else? My mind raced, trying to piece together what this could mean. The full story. I wasn't sure I could handle more of the truth, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. With shaking hands, I dialed Tom's number, and as the phone rang, I braced myself for whatever bombshell was about to drop. The phone rang, each tone dragging out like a lifetime. My heart thudded in my chest as I sat on that park bench, gripping the phone tight in my hand, bracing for whatever was coming next. Tom, my business partner and one of the few people I had trusted, had seen something that would peel back another layer of Sarah's deceit. I wasn't sure how much more I could take, but I had to know. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Finally, Tom answered. "Mike." His voice was cautious, hesitant, like he was unsure of how to begin. "Yeah, it's me," I said, my throat tight. "You said you saw Sarah? At the bar? What's going on, Tom? Don't hold back." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that makes your stomach churn because you know something bad is coming. Tom cleared his throat, and when he spoke again, there was a sadness in his voice I hadn't heard before. "I didn't want to get involved, Mike. I thought it wasn't my place. But after everything you've been through, I can't stay quiet anymore. Just tell me," I urged, feeling the tension build in my gut. "What did you see?" "It's not just what I saw last night," he began, his words deliberate and slow. "It's what I've been seeing for a while now." A cold wave washed over me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you mean, a while?" Tom sighed. "Mike, Sarah's been seeing this guy for months. I didn't know how to tell you. At first, I thought it was just some friendly thing, maybe a business meeting. But then it got obvious." My heart sank. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Months. Months? I had been living in this twisted version of reality, convinced that our marriage still had some foundation, while Sarah had been living a completely separate life. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was another pause on the line. "His name's Jake. He's one of those younger guys who hang around the bar downtown, the flashy types. I've seen them together at least 3 or 4 times. Last night, they weren't exactly keeping it low-key. The air felt too thick to breathe. My mind was racing, piecing together every night Sarah had come home late, every time she'd blown off my calls with some excuse about work or friends. All those nights. She hadn't even bothered to hide it well, had she? I had just been too blind, too trusting, too stupid to see what was right in front of me. They were together? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it anyway. "Yeah," Tom said, his voice soft. "They were all over each other, Mike. In public. Like she didn't care who saw them." That last part cut deep. The fact that she didn't care, that she wasn't even trying to keep up the pretense anymore, hit me harder than I expected. My legs felt weak, and I had to steady myself against the back of the bench. "She's been using me?" I muttered, the realization crashing down. "She's been using me this whole time. Tom's silence was confirmation enough. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew the truth now. Sarah had never loved me, not in the way I thought she had. She had been using my money, my stability, my life, all while carrying on with some young, flashy guy behind my back. "I'm sorry, Mike," Tom finally said. "I didn't know how to bring this up without hurting you, but you deserve to know. You deserve better than this." I sat there, numb, the truth settling into the pit of my stomach like a lead weight. Jake, just the name made my skin crawl. Some hotshot kid, feeding Sarah's need for excitement, while I sat at home, clueless. All the times she had come home smelling like perfume, smiling sweetly and kissing me on the cheek as if everything was fine. It made me sick. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, not accusing, but genuinely needing to understand. Tom let out a frustrated breath. "I don't know, man. I kept hoping it was a phase, that she'd come to her senses, that it would fizzle out. I didn't want to destroy your marriage if there was a chance to save it. But after last night, it was clear. She's not coming back, Mike." His words felt like a punch to the gut. She's not coming back. As much as I had tried to hold on, as much as I had wanted to believe that there was something left to salvage, I knew deep down that Tom was right. Sarah had made her choice long before our confrontation last night. She was already gone. I closed my eyes, trying to process the flood of emotions. Anger, sadness, humiliation. It was all too much. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice breaking. Tom was silent for a moment, and then he said something that would stick with me for a long time. "You walk away, Mike. You walk away and you don't look back. You deserve someone who values you, who appreciates everything you bring to the table. Sarah, she's lost. She's chasing something that doesn't last. You, on the other hand, can still build something real." I didn't respond right away. I was too busy trying to keep my emotions in check, to swallow the bitter truth that had been shoved down my throat. Tom was right, but it didn't make it hurt any less. "I'll figure it out," I said finally, though I didn't know if I believed it yet. "Thanks for telling me, Tom. I'm here if you need anything," he said, his voice genuine. "Just remember, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling more lost than ever. The truth was out now. The ugly, raw truth that Sarah had been lying to me for longer than I had imagined. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of clarity. Tom was right. I couldn't let her destroy me anymore. I couldn't keep chasing the ghost of a marriage that had died long before I had realized it. It was time to let go. The truth, it's an unforgiving thing. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It seeps into every corner of your mind, demanding to be reckoned with. And that's where I was reckoning. I walked back home, the sky turning shades of dark orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air felt heavier now, like the weight of what had just happened had pressed itself into the atmosphere. My mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts, but there was only one that stood out among the noise. It's over. When I got back to the house, it didn't feel like home anymore. The front door creaked open, and the silence inside greeted me with a coldness I hadn't felt before. It was the silence of something broken beyond repair. I didn't go straight to the bedroom where Sarah had packed up her things. I didn't check to see if she'd actually left, and I didn't want to. It didn't matter. Instead, I went to the living room and sat down, sinking into the same chair where I had discovered the texts, where the first cracks in my reality had appeared. For a moment, I let myself sit there in the stillness. Let it wash over me. The pain was there, but it wasn't the same sharp, cutting pain I'd felt the night before. This was different. It was a dull ache, like a wound that had been cauterized. Still raw, still burning, but final. I took a deep breath and reached for the glass of whiskey I'd poured the night before, untouched on the table beside me. I swirled the amber liquid, watching the way it caught the dim light of the room. It would be easy to drown in this, I thought. To let the bitterness, the betrayal, the anger consume me. It would be so easy to become a shell of the man I once was, to let Sarah's lies define the rest of my life. But then, in that moment, something inside me shifted. I thought about what Tom had said. You walk away, and you don't look back. It echoed in my head, louder now, more certain. He was right. For so long, I had been holding onto a fantasy, chasing after a version of Sarah that didn't exist anymore. Maybe never existed. I had been so focused on fixing what was broken that I hadn't realized the truth. It was time to stop trying to fix things that didn't want to be fixed. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the whiskey, feeling the warmth slide down my throat. And then, with a calmness I hadn't expected, I stood up and walked to the bedroom. The room felt empty. Sarah's clothes, her perfume bottles, the little trinkets she'd collected over the years. They were all gone. It should have felt like a void, a hollow space left behind, but instead, it felt like the weight had been lifted. The house no longer reeked of her lies, of her betrayal. It was just me now, just the truth. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the space she used to occupy, letting the finality of it all sink in. And then I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not one of defeat or regret, but a real smile, because for the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. I could feel the air in my lungs again. The chains of Sarah's manipulation, her deceit, they were gone. I walked over to the window and opened it, letting the crisp evening air fill the room. The wind carried with it the scent of pine trees and distant rain, and it felt like a new beginning. I could almost hear the universe whispering, "It's over. Now you're free." Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down and saw Sarah's name on the screen. My heart didn't race. There was no anger, no sadness, just a calm indifference. I let the phone buzz a few more times before I picked it up and swiped to answer. "Mike!" Her voice was tentative, unsure. It was the first time in years she didn't sound in control. She had probably expected me to break, to beg, to plead. But I didn't. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady, even. There was a pause on the other end, as if she was trying to figure out her next move. I wanted to say, I'll be staying with Jake for a while, just until things settle down. But maybe later we could talk? I mean, we had some good years, right? Maybe we can still be friends. Friends. She was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to keep me on the hook. I smiled again, a real, genuine smile, because for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm, "there's nothing left to say. I hope you find what you're looking for, but don't call me again." She was silent, stunned by my response, probably expecting a different reaction. But I didn't wait for her to speak. I hung up, dropping the phone onto the bed like it was the last piece of her I needed to let go of. And then, in the quiet of that empty room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I walked back to the window, staring out at the night sky, feeling the weight of everything that had happened lift off my shoulders. I had been broken, betrayed, and used. But I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't beaten. I was still here. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. As the cool wind brushed against my face, I whispered to the night, more to myself than to anyone, "I'm free." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed it. Moral of the story? You walk away from the things that try to break you. And when you do, when you really do, you'll find a strength you never knew you had. You'll find freedom, and it will feel like flying.